Hi guys, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and for this week on our New Year special, we have a special guest. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Dan, and I go under the name of Life School, and I co-run the LemonAmiga website, and I also produce all the LemonAmiga videos that some people may have seen on YouTube.
Now, Dan hasn't been on the show in voice form before, but we have played a fair few number of games together over Amiga Live. Things like Banshee, Deluxe Gallagher, and a fair few others, I think. Oh, Chaos Engine as well. There's a fair few there. And each time we've always done like YouTube footage together. And as it was coming up closer to the new year, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to actually get like a guest on the show? So I've invited Dan along. Now, usually I do a dig into a game title, dig into some history, or sort of a review, but this time I thought, well, we've passed 60 episodes, we're getting right up there now, so I thought let's have a look back over the past, just over the past year now, right to the beginning of the show, and try and pick a number of games each. I mean, I've gone and picked 5, as has Dan, and we're just going to do a simple countdown, look back at a few of them, give some thoughts, and just have a chat. Now, first off, just as we begin, I'm going to go with number 5, which was Sensible World of Soccer. Now, this was quite a while ago. I think that was episode 41. I'm in no means a huge football fan. I don't watch the stuff. I'm not addicted to it. I don't really play any games or anything major like that. I just dip in and out of the odd one. They can be fun on stuff like Xbox Lives and things like that. But again, I've never really got into it in a big way. Sensi was just something completely different. And when I started digging into this and looking at the history, and there's a hell of a lot of story to share there, and I think I did quite a good job. A lot of people seem to like that episode, and for a while it was one of my more popular ones. I'm not sure about you, Dan. Are you a fan of Sensi at all?
Well, I used to play it a lot with a friend, version 1.1, and I played it so much it actually did me wrist in and give me wrist cramps and things like that. It used to beat me every single time. I used to, we got so good at it. At one point, we figured out if you tap the joystick, the controller a few times when the goalie's holding the ball, you can actually make the goalie run forward. And if the opponents jump out of the way, you can actually make the goalie score in the opponent goal. And it's just like, that's something crazy that you've played it too many times to figure out. Also, if you tap 3 times to the left, it brings up a transfers box. We can move your players around. So it's just like stuff like that. I never actually figured out and found out in magazines, and there was no internet then. So I've learned so much from playing it since that time.
It was a very funny one as well. I mean, when I played the original, it was arcade pinball effectively. You know, you're bouncing the ball from point to point, and it was really fun, and it wasn't really like a proper football game. And then when you get to Swazen and they stick in this weird managerial element, and I think I said back then with the review that they don't really go far enough with it. It's very basic and light, and they could have done things like expand it out into like building stadiums or doing more actual management, but I think they kept it light enough with the amount of gameplay you got from the actual game that it made it a lot better than it would have been on its own.
Yeah, it's a very arcadey game. It's not a simulator, you know. In real life, players don't run after the ball altogether. People stand around and wait for the ball, and they're passing it around for a bit. But this is a high-speed action game on the Amiga, and it's kind of a love it or hate it game. Sometimes you play a game like Kickoff 2 and you might hate it. Some people might absolutely love it. So if you can hear any fireworks going off, that's in the background, by the way. Somebody's having a party behind me. But yeah, I mean, you've got to respect.
They're all celebrating the new year, just to start a bit early.
Absolutely. You've got to respect John Hare and what he tried to do for the scene, and he kept it going with iterations of sensible soccer, even up to this day. So he's tried to keep it tidy. And yeah, it doesn't go into the detail of all these infinite managerial sims that we got, Football Manager, etc. So I'm not a massive fan. I'm not good at it by any stretch, but I can't help admiring Sensible Software, Sensible World Soccer, and what they tried to do and what they did bring. And for a while, it was a #1 game on the Amiga.
I will say, I think for its time, it was as close to perfect as you could get for an actual football game. And I think they showed that themselves because they could never make anything as good as that going forward because they did like a PlayStation version. I think they re-released it later on. I don't know, they think they did something for the PS2 even and the Xbox and tried to capture that magic. But each time they always tried to mix in like a 3D element, sort of like FIFA, and it just never worked. And I always thought they needed to stick to that top-down 2D element. And I've always been a big fan of that. I don't know what it is about this game. It's just so much fun. And the number of times I've just fired it on for an evening and just spent a couple of hours going through it and keep driving my team up. It's always Chester City. I'm not even from Chester, but Chester City has always been favourite because I know what players work for them. I know how to work them all the way up to the top to win the Premiership. So it's loads of fun.
Oh, wow, absolutely. Yeah, if you've got a favourite team, I know my mum supports Manchester City. I know they're doing very well at the moment.
Probably people turning off now, going on about the team names. Right, shall we move on to your number 5, Dan? I think you
Number
chose
5, yeah.
Defender of the Crown, which was the 45th episode.
Yeah, that's another game. It's pretty simple on the surface, but for its time when that came out, it really did blow people's minds as to what the Amiga could do. Because it was in many shop windows, you passed these things and you saw a knight firing boulders towards a castle. And it's like, wow, the Amiga can do that. And it was just all a very simple game. The core dynamics is just maybe 5 or 6 screens, it's a map screen and you go through a raid in a castle and things like that. So it can be deceptively hard sometimes when you get killed early. But as you showed in your review, you got really far and it successively beat all your opponents, and it's a really good feeling as well.
It was a funny one because I am really not into strategy games like that. I won't put loads of time into them, but there's just something really fun about this one. It's actually really addictive as well, and you can probably complete it in 25-30 minutes if you know what you're doing.
Oh yeah, easy.
There's enough there and there's enough random bits to keep you going back and develop it as a game and stuff. And I did have a fair bit of fun with it. And it was also the one the first time a developer pointed out of one of my shows to say that I got something wrong on the history section. And that was Jim Sachs who was behind it all.
Yeah, he comments and watches all his videos because he loves that game, and it really showed off the Amiga. So for me, it's very easy gameplay. It's like a Risk type game where you play it with a mouse. You just click the mouse a few times and that's it. You complete it. But for me, it really blew open the doors to what was possible on the Amiga because we had a lot of conversions before then. A lot of typing text adventures. I can't even remember when it came out. Was it 87, 88? There was nothing really at the time.
No, there was just nothing like it, so.
Really, R.J. Michael took the thing and really made it playable for everybody. And it's just become an icon on the Amiga scene. So I definitely have to include it on this list for that.
The graphics as well. Just the whole look of it, the way it moves just when you're looking at different parts. It's almost like art. It's absolutely amazing. It did when I sat there to play it properly. It just blew me away. Just the amount of effort that must have gone into it to make it look that good.
Yeah, pixel by pixel, literally Jim Sachs literally drew it all. And yeah, it's an interactive move. It literally absolutely blew my mind when I saw that and nagged my mum for an Amiga.
So yeah, let's move on to number 4. And I had to pick Frontier Elite 2, which was the 28th episode. Now, this is probably the earliest episode from the shows that I've picked. And I had to go with this one just because of what it actually entails. And the whole universe on a floppy disk. I couldn't believe this when I was actually doing this show, the amount of effort that must have gone into making this thing actually work, and the fact that you get to explore a full universe and fly around it and get involved in like trading and combat. And it's really complicated, but it's loads and loads of fun. And I'm still going back to it on a regular save that I'm playing at the moment and trying to get through. And I must have sunk about 15, 20 hours into that over a couple of months, and that's in between me recording bits of the show every week and try to get through other games as well. It just keeps bringing me back, and I just really can't help it. I don't know if you've played it at all, Dan, or it's one you've been into.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favourite reviews of the Lemon channel. It's got one of the most views as well. Yeah, just like I say, the world's your oyster. You can mine pirate, trade, spy on people, can do all kinds of things. And it's like an RPG, but it isn't, because it's like a space simulator, but it isn't. So you get the best of everything. And when you're upgrading your ship, it feels great. You get the more speed and most powerful lasers, and suddenly it becomes easier. And that means you can get a bigger ship and means you can get more trade going on. And it takes a long time to build up your money right from the beginning. But as you go deeper and deeper into it, it just opens out and it becomes a massive, expansive game.
I think what really surprised me with it is just the fact that you can fly up to any other planet, any other galaxy, and then land on them and fly right down and see actual buildings and stuff and take off and go back into space. And for the time, there was nothing really like this. I mean, effectively, the original Elite had this sort of a level, but it never had that bit where you were flying down. It was all in space, and it was just unbelievable how much actual stuff they've managed to pack into it.
Yeah, it was all kind of procedurally generated, which just means heavy maths to the rest of us. But yeah, when you went to these bases, you saw the buildings next to them. There was monuments, there was roads, there was parks, fields, hills, all these skyscrapers around, and they were just randomly procedurally generated.
You could even go to London as well and see Big Ben. I'm sure that was included in there.
Yeah, London, Sydney, real world locations. They didn't have to do that. But when you think back at the time, there wasn't anything on that scale on any computer, really. It was vastly superior to the likes of Robocop 3, which used 3D and, things like that. It used them really quickly, but you needed to have a good CPU. And a lot of users were forced to upgrade when they were trying to play Frontier, because on an Amiga 500, it's just a bit too slow.
I think even when I was doing the show, and when I go back to play it now, a lot of the time I use it on emulation, just because I can pump up the speed of the accelerator in the Amiga, and I think I've got it set to, is it an 060 is the highest card you can go to? That's it.
Yeah, 060, yeah.
Win UAE I'm using that in. I've got a funny setup because I'm actually using a clone of my A1200's compact flash card, and the great thing with it is I can just clone all these fancy other cards to make it run even better, and some of the speeds I can get out of that is incredible. But this is one of those games where the faster the Amiga is, just the smoother it runs. And when you play it at that sort of a level, things like the opening movie, like the introduction with the ships flying around, just look amazing. It's so smooth and they're all twirling around in space and stuff. It looks fantastic.
Yeah, it's like Defender of the Crown was an interactive movie. That introduction to Frontier was really cinematic. It took the game to a new level. You were looking at these things and thinking, wow, you mean I can actually play this? It's got this music by Dave Law and all these ships that you can do. It's sometimes I'm overawed by it, particularly, like I say, it came on just the one disc, and they're still producing spin-offs of this game even today. Yeah. So it's still a massive franchise, and there's a lot of fans of the game in all its versions.
I will say, I've actually played the current one, and although they're vastly different, obviously, because of the graphics and the advancements and things, they're very similar in style and gameplay in a way, and it's just that you do get that aura of being able to explore and just go anywhere. And it's incredible thinking that was available like 20 odd years ago on the Amiga for something that you could get today on all modern systems.
Yeah, but it did take an incredibly long time to create. Maybe 2, 3, 4 years. It took a long time. So by today's standards, well, actually, they've produced the latest game pretty quickly compared to back in the day, because they've got all the 3D technology now, which they didn't have. Yeah. But yeah, you still can't do atmospheric landings and basic stuff that you used to be able to do in Frontier. So it was just unbelievable.
Right, we'll move on to your fourth game. I believe it's Desert Strike, which was episode 13.
Wow, we're going all the way back to 13. Well, Desert Strike, and obviously you covered the Jungle Strike as well, which was the follow-up, which I watched just last night. And yeah, Desert Strike's just a classic game. The first level could be an entire game by itself. It gives you lots of different missions. You can go through them in any order. I remember the feeling the first time I took down the airport and the symbol finally disappeared off the map after wiping the entire thing clean with a chain gun. It's just like, yeah, that's a very satisfying feeling. But it's extremely hard as well. If you go in there all guns blazing, you'll just get shot to pieces.
Yeah, so I really love that about it. You feel, as you first go into it, that it's just like a run and gun, fly in there, blast at everything, try and survive. If you play it smart and tactically and really take your time and circle around things and come at it in a clever way, it really does, for me, it feels like it changes into a completely different type of... You can be mad if you want and go swooping in there, but you just end up getting blown up and sent flying.
Yeah, it's so strategic on those levels because you've got fuel to look after, so you're looking for fuel dumps, and you've got ammo to find. You're running out of health, so you need to pick up people and take them back to just get a bit more health. And so you're constantly flicking around on the radar. Oh, there's a missing in action down there. Oh, no, I need this, I need that. And like you said, the slower you produce your tactics, the more in depth it goes, and you can get much more out of it than just a run and gun shooter.
I mean, I love this one to bits. I really did. And I did actually look at it as one of my choices. It was just pipped to it by a couple of other games, really, but it's right up there. And again, I love this to bits. It's absolutely awesome. And it's a shame because the Amiga did get Jungle Strike, didn't it? But it didn't get Urban Strike, which was the third one.
Yeah, I mean, as you said with Jungle Strike, the third level of Desert Strike, I think you were in a city, and that really put me off, and I stopped playing it after that.
Yeah.
And Jungle Strike opens with the city, and I stopped playing it and the instant that I saw it. It's just like, who wants to play that?
When I was playing Desert Strike, I thought, well, I had so much fun with it. I thought, I'm going to give the second one a go and try my best to get through that city part. And the problem is it's just boring. It takes absolutely ages to do. Like in the first one, the missions are fantastic. It's really well put together. It's very quick. You can explore properly. In the second one, it's just really slow. It's very dull. I mean, it's all like straight roads and buildings to fly around and blow up and stuff. And they're all like American landmarks, of course. It just doesn't really do much, and it really was disappointing compared to the first game. I don't even know why they launched with that level. That could have been towards the back of the game. They could have made it more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's called Jungle Strike, so you'd think the minimum requirement is the first level is you over a jungle striking stuff. So you're over a city taking out, well, hippies in hippie vans and stuff like that. So, but that just highlights the greatness of the first game because it really was so great. Did the first game have passwords? I think that's the only thing that I really would have liked. Yeah, so you can go back and you can practice.
A lot of Amiga games do that with passwords, and I can never understand why, because you've got a floppy disk drive built into the Amiga. Everybody's got one. It would have been so easy just to write a little bit of software saying, a little menu off saying, put a save on a disk, but none of them ever seem to do it most of the time.
Yeah, that really, because if you're playing Desert Strike to the end, if you can't save it and you don't want to save it, that could be like 3, 4, or 5 hours. I've no idea, but it's a long time. And if you're invested into it and taking out the Scud missiles and stuff like that, you really do have to invest that time to find the stuff and get rid of it in the right order. Yeah. So it really could have done with that. I can load up Desert Strike anytime and play that and switch to the Hellfires and start blasting away. It's just got that instant playability that is there with Super Mario Brothers and all the great classics as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's definitely one that sticks in the mind, and I'm not really a big fan of it as I should be on the Amiga, because I tend to always drift back to the actual Mega Drive version. I think that's more because I played it as a kid and it's the one I'm used to, and I'm just used to having that controller. But again, a fantastic game, whatever version you get. I mean, I think I've played the Master System, the Game Gear, I've even played the Atari Lynx, which was quite a rare one, I think. And yeah, because I had to pay telegames prices, which are always very expensive, but it was an absolutely amazing port for that system. So it's a great game, whatever system you want it on.
Yeah, I think the Mega Drive was the flagship. It seemed the smoothest, and it had great intro music as well, which is incredibly memorable. Yeah, and whatever platform, again, whatever way you're playing it, Desert Strike, play it.
Right, let's move on to number 3. And for mine, I have chosen a very recent one we've covered, which is R-Type. I am absolutely terrible at shooters. It takes me ages to get into them, and R-Type is probably one of the hardest ones on the system, I think. But I just love this game to bits. I cannot stop playing it. I think when I first started doing like the gameplay footage, and I got really, really far. I got right up to the second level and maybe up to the boss. I'm not sure. Is that, you can remember, can't you, Dan? What's the second level? Is it like the brains around the surrounds on the floor and the roof?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I got quite far on that.
You got halfway through it, yeah. I mean, I was saying that the aliens on the second level look kind of brown or even orange. Yeah. And they could have done them a really, really good colour scheme. But R-Type, I've never been into those kinds of shooters, but you really thought it was, I mean, it's got that arcade addictive quality, hasn't it? So you just want more go.
It's just so well done. And the opening music, For an arcade port, this was amazing. And at first when I heard that, I thought, oh, it must be really good on the arcade. But when I went to go and have a look at it, there is no music for that on the arcade machine. It was Chris Hulsbeck just made it up himself and did a decent bit of music to match the game. And it just, when you play it, it just matches it so well. It's so perfect to go through. But yeah, I had loads of fun with it. I was getting so full of it. I started looking at the other games and I started having ideas that maybe I should start like an R-Type collection. And I've actually picked some of the other games because they're all really dirt cheap. And I think the very last one is R-Type Final, which come out on the PS2, but it's only like £3 or £4. So I've been slowly building a collection of them. There isn't really anything. I always thought this was like a massive franchise, like spanning all different systems and things, but it just died when it got up to the PS2. They did R-Type Final, and then everything ever since then has just been like remakes of like the first to the third game.
Right. I think, well, there's a big Gradius scene and that kind of fizzled out as well. Maybe horizontal shooters have had their day, but there was a score of them on the early 8-bit systems and the Commodore 64 and things like that. They were, again, I think the Commodore 64 music on R-Type is phenomenal. I think it's better than the Amiga, and they did a really good job. But if you play R-Type 2 on the Amiga, that has the scrolling backgrounds and stuff like that. So maybe that'll be, well, you have.
I did give that a go in one of the live streams, but it was too tough. I don't even think I managed to get past the first level. I did give it a good go, though. I think later on for that series, and I think this happened with a lot of other game titles as well, when they started moving into more 3D versions of things, they tried updating the graphics and giving it fancier backgrounds and more polygons and stuff to try and make it appeal to modern audiences, and they just don't look as good as they should do, because I don't think the machines for a lot of the time were really capable of doing the sort of graphics it should be, say to like modern standards. One thing I did buy recently, because they've re-released like, I think it's called R-Type EX or DX on Steam. Mm-hmm. They've also done a version on Switch as well, but I'd never play a shooter like this on the Switch, because I get very angry when I'm playing games and I'm like banging buttons and crashing the stick around and stuff. I'd just destroy the console. Much safer to play it on the PC. And they've done an amazing job with it. They've upgraded all the graphics in HD and the sound effects and all the arcade sounds there. It looks fantastic. It's a really, really good version of the game. But it's just a shame that they just killed that series off. It's just bizarre. I don't know why they did it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's sometimes easier playing it on a digital micro-switch joystick, and then you can, have complete control. But some people love the D-pad. I mean, do you prefer the D-pad on stuff like this?
Well, that was a funny one, because at first I did prefer the D-pad, but in some sections when I'm playing it through, I actually like switching over to the analog stick. I think when it's really tight and close and there's like loads of bullets flying around, I can use a D-pad to be more accurate, but then I like moving over to the stick when I'm floating and flying in between things over distance and stuff. I play this very oddly when I'm going through it, but I have lots of fun with it, so what can I say?
Yeah, well, it is a classic. It's just that sometimes people don't realise that the arcade version was meant for you to throw lots of coins in there pretty rapidly. So it's difficult for a reason, and that difficulty was faithfully transposed onto all the conversions. So
except on the Amiga, because I did find out during the history stuff that they made it even harder on the Amiga because they really wanted to push it as a version and make it something special. And it is, because it's rock hard. It really is tough.
You got further than I ever did, mate. I'm telling you.
Anyway, I think, shall we move on to your third game?
Yeah, which one is it?
It's Deluxe Galaga.
Ah, that's one that we played together, isn't it? One of the two-player games.
Yes, we did that in a show, and that was episode 52, which was the 1 year episode. Bloody hell, that's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, well, it's only a month ago now. We did record it quite some time ago. It could have been May or something this year. And I think that was the first time you'd seen the game, if I'm not wrong. I'd heard about it on and off, but it's not something I'd ever gone out of my way to try and find. And again, I'm not a shooter fan, so I would never approach this myself, and then you were highly recommending it and stuff and sort of wrote me in, and I started playing it and it just blew me away. I think it's just so addictive because there's some different parts to it, risking going into the meteor storm and going into a memory maze that you can go into, and there's lots of different things. You can walk past baddies or you can just get stuck in. Every time you upgrade your weapon, you feel like you're stronger and you can take on more of the enemies. I did really like the weapons, the amount of choice that you could get, and then you got the option to mess with things in the shop and stuff. It really was packed full of it. we haven't even seen the best weapons yet. If you get the fireballs or the WW1 weapon, you can have a stream of bullets like as big as your ship going all the way up the screen.
I think we were playing for ages. I think we did a good hour, didn't we, for the show? So.
Yeah, at least 4 or 5 minutes, but we didn't see the money ship, which appears if you leave one alien floating along the screen forever. Well, for about 5 minutes, you'll get the money ship. You blow that up, you get 1,000 credits for nothing. So if you do that on every level, you can have $3,000 before the first shot. There's pirates, there's something that fires a space egg towards you and a big laser beam. There's the big end of level bosses that we managed to see one of the end of level bosses, didn't we? Level 25.
Yeah. I mean, the really amazing thing about this, it's effectively a homebrew. The guy, it wasn't a commercial release put up against the big games at the time. So I reckon this could have made a fortune if it had been put through a publisher or something.
Yeah, but this is the peak of the Amiga users kind of homebrew scene, isn't it? This is one of the pinnacles of PD. And there isn't that many people that haven't at least heard about Deluxe Galaga on the Amiga. I've played it in loads of different versions, ECS, AGA, all the different iterations. And for me, it's just the playability. You can't buy that. You can't just come up with that on a piece of paper. It's something directly from the old school arcades. And I'm not a big shoot 'em up fan. Some of the times I hate them. But that thing has just got so much playability. Even when you die, you come back for more and you just one more go.
I mean, it's even better that 2-player on that was, I've played it a fair bit on the 1-player since, but the 2-player really is something special.
Yeah. Yeah, it's even got the different power-ups like the extra letters and stuff like that. But I like how we were both fighting all the aliens and both sharing out the money. It's a compromise, and if one of you has weaker weapons...
It was quite nice. You had to really work together to get the extras and stuff and actually get through the game, because you could just be stealing stuff off the other person all the time. But if you work together, you can get really far on it.
Yeah, and if we had the best weapons and the auto-fire, that is manic. It's absolutely manic. So we're going to have to get together and play that again some other time.
Yeah, definitely. Right, let's move on to number 2. And for this, I had to pick Chaos Engine, which I did way back in episode 30. Now, I knew about this game. I wasn't too familiar. I'd not played it in depth or anything. I'd only dipped in and out of it, I think, over the years. It never really appealed to me. And then I played it on the Amiga Live with you, Dan. And because you were effectively showing me how it was done, and you can see that in the gameplay footage that we did together. And this is number one. This was an amazing, amazing game. And just the way it opens up and the way the combat is and the levels look and the graphics and like this weird, is it steampunk? With all, like the goggles and things and the chunky graphics and just the way the speed of it and those levels and how big it was. And I had an awesome time with it.
Yeah, again, it's playability, but initially I was put off by it because I died straight away on the early levels and thought, I'm not that interested in this. I'm not getting anywhere with it. And then I don't know how many years later, it could have even been in the Lemon competition, we played it again, actually sitting down, being a dedicated player of it. And like you say, it opens out encouraging the player with different graphics, different levels. The levels are so intricately designed, so linear and yet so fun at the same time. You can't really go wrong. So you're just wandering around this terrific map, blowing everybody up and having a great time doing it.
Graphically, to me, it looked like a much later PC game, something you just say much like a few years down the line. I'm really impressed with how it looked on the Amiga.
Yeah, well, for me, it was also the voice speech sound effects. It's like, player save and world complete and, level complete. I love those kinds of touches, and coming from a 64 background, it never ceased to amaze me when, the Amiga can speak, can actually put voice speech. So that's definitely something that impressed me. But
especially if you think about it, the Amiga itself, the amount of stuff it could do all the time, especially when it came out, and you look over to similar things on like the PC market, to get this sort of audio and graphics and stuff, you'd have been spending like hundreds, probably over £1,000 to get a system even like halfway. I mean, obviously that changed as the Amiga got older and stuff, but in the early years, it really was the king of everything. And even with this, the PCs like with DOS and everything in the earlies, they were not capable of doing anything like this at all.
Well, it's kind of a block pattern overhead shooter. It's not that difficult to code creatively, and I think the PC did get a conversion. I mean, it's a shame the AGA conversion on the Amiga, all they did was basically tweak a few of the colours. That was a bit of a letdown. They could have really gone to town on it.
Could have gone to town and done something better.
I think it was just a basic 16 colour. It could have even been an 8 colour game, but because they were using greens, browns and greys mixed together very cleverly.
I can't remember offhand, but do you know if they did a CD32 version of this? And I think they did, didn't they? they did an AGA version, that was it, yeah.
Yeah, it was the port of the AGA version. And again, just like Speedball 2, I think they just changed the colours a little bit, which is a little bit of a shame. For me, once I found out that the preacher had the first aid kit and I could press space and grab his first aid kit and top myself up, that kind of opened out the entire game for me. And even playing it in 2-player mode, I've learned how to play it so carefully now that I don't even need the preacher. And it was just a joy to get through because it was like double the firepower, just like Deluxe Gallagher, double the firepower.
You did. I mean, you knew every single one of the levels we went to. I think we only stopped because we ran out of time, didn't we? We could have probably completed. I think we did an hour on that as well, but just for the show.
Yeah, but we didn't record any audio, just the video, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'd have loved to have heard that chat. But I think playing it in the Lemon competition, unless I'd sat down for 3 weeks dedicated to try and play it, I wouldn't have mastered it because I'd actually sat down and wanted to do that. I mean, of course, on the Amiga, it was difficult when every game loaded up in settings. You just think, if I'm bored with this, I'll just put Lotus 2 on, or I'll just put Stunt Car Racer on, or I'll just put whatever on. So it only took seconds, and if the game wasn't good enough, that was it, ejected something else. Whereas if you're spending time playing it and invested time, just like Desert Strike, it was a whole new kettle of fish and a whole new ball game.
Yeah,
so
I mean, there really was something special about it. It was one of those, even when I first started playing it, and I could just tell that it just wasn't like the rest. It really does get its hooks into you and keeps pulling you back in for more, which is always a plus for a game like that.
Yeah, unfortunately the sequel wasn't any good, but let's just gloss over that and move on.
Right, let's move on to your number 2, and I believe you picked Walker, which I did in episode 51.
Yeah, Walker, I mean, it's one of them games that is kind of half finished in a way because they stopped it and started it about 3 times, put it back on the shelf.
Yeah, part way through the development, because I think it was in development for 2 years, and usually Amiga games at a push at 9, maybe a year at the top end. I know you got obviously things like Frontier Elite 2, but those were something different entirely. But this one, they stopped it part way through to go and develop Lemmings, and well, just look what happened there and how big of a hit that thing came on to be. And then they came back to this. It was a bit of a funny one. Again, I can't say this was one of my favourites. I don't know if I was a bit down at it, but down with it too much in the actual review. For me, as a playing experience, again, you've put this as one of your favourites, so I don't want to be too down on it. But for me, it was just too quick to play. If you don't play it for extended periods of times, it's a lot of fun. You really can just have a quick blast with it, enjoy it, put it down and walk away. But for long-term playing through sections, it's just, for me, it's boring. And I don't know how you find it in that way, or...
Well, I don't tend to play it so often most days because it's very hard and it's very long. And those are the two main things about it, really. If it was a little bit easier, so you could get through maybe half of the first section and then it broke it up with something and then the second half and you could just romp right through it, it wouldn't have been so bad. You can't save, you can't enter passwords. And the other thing is, for me, it needed some rockets and some lasers, some guns and some target sights and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
you can
that
lock
was
on
one
to.
thing. I have no idea why they didn't put in any extra weapons. I'm not sure. When I was looking at the history, I think they said that they just struggled to do anything extra with it. They were pushing at one point to put in like a platformer section, and they got as far as developing it. But because it was in development for so long, they just ran out of time and just ditched it, which is a shame because I think there's points in the games where it feels like you should be getting out of the Walker and doing something a bit different for a while before getting back in. Even if they've added things like shops and extra items, it would have just been so much better.
It's kind of a half idea that kind of mostly works. And this is one of my favourites from the ones that you've reviewed. It's not one of my favourite games of all time, but it does have the voice speech sound effects and extra, if you've got extra memory.
And the music for it was amazing. I don't know, it kept reminding me of the RoboCop theme, I think I said in the show at the time. Is it the one where the director of the company gets thrown out of the window and you got the rap at the end, and it's got a similar sort of song at the beginning? I just thought it was amazing.
Well, for me, I love the Lemmings-like graphics because you've got like these tiny guys running on the screen firing little dots towards you, and you are this massive great walker that can just run and stomp them all and just gun them all down.
It's so gory as well. I did love that about it. I mean, just the way you could run through stuff on the ground and just blast away like crazy, and all these bodies flying everywhere, and they look like lemmings as well. It's great.
Yeah, backed up with the tremendous sound effects as well, particularly on level 2, because everything's just just, boom, 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 you're blowing up helicopters and blowing up mines, boom, boom, boom. So if you turn up the siren on that, it's brilliant. But again, it's just a little bit too hard to be an absolute proper classic because it does take time and dedication to get through it.
It comes so close. I can understand why you picked it. It comes really close. For me, it just didn't get past the finish line, which is a shame, really.
Felt a bit like an adventure. You've got a train coming along and then you've got an air balloon coming along and all these different things that are happening, So like I say, it was almost there and it had all these elements, just that unlike Banshee that we're coming on to next, it just wasn't 100%. I give it top marks as a very good game and one of the best games on the Amiga, but also I love games like Batman the movie. You can't have everything.
Now that's a classic. I covered that in the very, very early days in the show. I think that was like episode 11 or 12.
11, yeah.
11 was it? Oh god, yeah. I mean, that was an amazing game and that almost made my list as a standout, but growing up as a kid, the Spectrum version was the one for me. And I thought the Amiga one was great when I played it later and I really enjoyed it and stuff, but I could never get over how fun the Specky port was. And I think it's because the driving sections on that were just, even though the Amiga generally was better, I just liked the way they did the side-on view with the car and the way you could sling it round corners and have to avoid other vehicles. And I've never really been a fan of, behind the car racer, and that one just appealed to me. Anyway, for me, that's always felt like the better version, but...
That's one of them games that's just great on any platform and a great tie-in, great movie license. Again, that's one of my favourite episodes that I've reviewed. It's got a massive view list and I love the variety. It's not a platformer, it's not a driving game, it's not a puzzler, it's all a lot put together and it's just instant playability and instant fun.
Was this the first one they did because it was almost like a formula where they would have 4 or 5 different levels. This is Ocean. 4 or 5 different levels around a movie. And they would always be pretty varied like that because they did it with things like, I think RoboCop RoboCop was the same throughout, wasn't it? I think I'm thinking of Untouchables.
Untouchables, yeah. That used the same thing where when you died, the level meter was on the centre of the screen, the face changed. So yeah, they did do that with a couple of games, but Ocean didn't really last that long before moving on to the platforms, the CD stuff. So for me, Batman was the pinnacle of Ocean titles.
They should have pushed Walker off and put Batman in there.
Well, we kind of have in a way.
Yeah.
So what's your number one then?
Right, well, my number one, without a doubt, had to be Stunt Car Racer, which I did back in episode 36. And I just don't know what to make of this game. It's just awesome. I had so much fun going back to it. I had real problems recording the episode. I tend to do these over a weekend together. And I ended up playing this and playing it and several hours went by and I thought I'm going to have to start doing the notes and stuff before I start recording. And it's the first time a game had just grabbed me like that and, before I would go on to do the rest of the recording. I'm so glad that I spent so much time with it. It were absolutely fantastic. The way that you go up ramps at this incredible speeds and then it feels like you're almost going off into space and it's almost like moonlight gravity and you come crashing back down and the car bounces and most of the time, assuming you don't come off it, it doesn't blow up or anything. It was just so much fun. It was like driving on a roller coaster. I don't know how else to describe it. I don't know, did you play it much at all, Dan?
Yeah, massive fan of Stunt Car Racer. I've never mastered it. Some levels that you really can't master, like the drawbridge. It's so random, you just end up ploughing straight into the thing. But the roller coaster and the ski jump, they are possible. I did play them quite a lot for the games competition. I love the speed on offer, even on a stock 000 processor you can get. And massive speed.
The speed, especially if you start using the turbo full whack going around places. I think the only problem with it is the original release of it, it's just very limited with the tracks because I think there's only about 8 or 9, might be 10, but there's not that many of them. Now luckily they did do, I think it was a fan release later, was Stunt Car Racer TNT, which doubled up the track and it might have included the originals as well. I don't know if you played that one.
Yeah, the TNT was fan made tracks and they optimized it as well. They made a turbo mode so you could go a lot quicker as well. I really like that. They did a really good job of making some fun tracks there that are a lot more fun actually than some of the originals, so definitely check that out, TNT.
I mean, I'm tempted to do a show on that at some point as well. It's a fan-made one, so there's a lot of history behind it. Probably worth covering.
Yeah, I mean, I play a lot of WRC 7, the latest games on the PCs, and it's surprising it's the same mechanics of jumping over hills, having lots of airtime, coming down, crash landing, getting round corners, screeching off. It's just that in this one, it added the extra thing of when you went around corners, you could fall off, and you had to wait for the crane to go and pick you up, and then put you back down on the track again. It was like a 3D, well, it was a 3D game, but that added so much more because you didn't go off, we'd throw the entire lap away. So
it also had that, like, the link-up mode as well, because I think it would work with an Amiga and an ST.
Oh, yeah.
So you could have two players again. I don't know if you ever got a chance to try that back in the day.
I haven't tried it, no, but I've heard about it. They're compatible, like Lotus 2.
I don't think that, yeah, because this isn't on Amiga Live either, is it?
I'm not sure if it is. We'll have to have a look.
Yeah, well, definitely. We'll have to have a go with this one, because that was an amazing game. Anyway, let's go on.
I think it's because it's not split screen. I'm not sure if Amiga Live could have it split screen. I'm not quite sure.
All right. Yeah, but, sorry, you won't, because you're supposed to be playing from the same... I don't know, actually.
Yeah, anyway, we'll see anyway. It's still an all-time classic, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, yes. For me, well worth number one. Out of like all the games I've covered, it's one that I keep going back to. I did that months and months ago, and it's still like sat at the top of my favourites on whatever, either an emulator I've got on my actual Amiga. So I always have a quick blast on Stunt Car Racer. Anyway, let's move on to your number one.
My number one game, and my number one happens to be Banshee AGA of the games that you've reviewed. Can you remember when you did that one?
Oh, that was episode 35.
35. Right, well, Banshee is one of those games that made me want to upgrade to an Amiga 1200 because it had great graphics and great playability. And as I've already said, I'm not a great shoot-'em-up fan. I can't hardly play them to save my life. I prefer driving games and platformers. But there was something about this, as we've said all the way through this past hour. It was the playability. It just sucked me straight in. And as soon as I started getting the big upgrades, as you found out when we played it together, it's just like, wow, yeah, let's take them on. Let's, it's got really meaty sound effects and boom, boom, boom and all the rest of it. It just drew me in.
Let's move on to the worst games that I've covered, or at least what we both think are the worst ones. Let's go with you first, Dan. What did you pick?
I picked Shadow of the Beast, number one.
Oh, that's a bit of a controversial one. I mean, I did a full 3-part series on that one. I was convinced by the end I was going to start losing listeners because it was a bit of a strange one to do 3 games in a row like that. But I felt they were so different from game to game, and they did get better as they went on, but you really don't like the first one, do you?
For me, it's just style over substance, as most people tend to say. It was a graphics demo that they created maybe 10 layers of parallax scrolling, and you could have a nice parallax effect as you run down a field. And then you went underground, and then, you shot a few monsters, and then you got completely lost, and then you had to go above ground to get a key, and then to open a well, and then I think AVGN have played it recently on a different conversion and came to the same conclusion.
I mean, for me, it felt like it was more of a playable demo. I love parts graphically and like the music, just the entire, as an experience, it was fantastic. There was, for the time, there was nothing else like it. And being able to like see that in a shop on a monitor and stuff compared to all the other systems, it really would have blown people away. It's just, as a game, yeah, there's just not a lot there. It's pretty average at best.
I think it must have taken over from Defender of the Crown as the most shop windowed game on the Amiga. I certainly saw it. But, I mean, with Beast 2, you had the great graphics and the immense difficulty. With Beast 3, you had kind of good graphics and kind of good gameplay. But with Beast 1, you had kind of a demo, and then for me there was nothing else interesting about it, so I'd rather play Rick Dangerous.
They put in the actual original box, like I think it was a t-shirt, amazing artwork and print cards and stuff, and it was like the early versions of like limited editions, that sort of stuff, and it really was special. And then they charged an absolute fortune, about I think it was 35 pounds. Yeah, it was £35 at the time, which was, compared to other games which were 20 to 25 top end, it really wasn't. I mean, I can understand why they put that stuff in to make it seem like bigger value, but they were probably paying like £2 or £3 just for the t-shirt. Not even that would it have been in mass print jobs back then.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the artwork. It's got very unique artwork through these Psygnosis games. There's a very famous artist, I forget his name now, but they had that style running through it, and they had thematic music and great graphics. It's just that it just, for my money anyway, I'm sure there must be people out there that love it. Compared to Speedball 2 and Flashback and Prince of Persia and all the rest of the games, it's just a wasted opportunity.
Yeah. best I could compare it to was Altered Beast over on the Sega system. I think the Amiga got a version of that, but that was a very poor port. And it was the same sort of thing. Huge sprites, nice looking graphics, and the main core of the gameplay, there's just nothing there to walk and beat people up, just nothing to it. It's very disappointing, I think, in that regard.
Yeah. So, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Wolfchild when you're going around jumping on things on different levels. And again, you could turn into a wolf in that and start beating people up. And it's got good graphics, but it's got better gameplay. And there was a lot of good platformers out there on the Amiga, Rough and Tumble and things like that, even Super Frog. And so, for my money, the first Beast game, it wasn't even as good as the second Beast game, which I also hate with similar passion.
Well, let's move on to my worst game, and I covered this quite recently, and I had to pick it. It is Double Dragon. Now, I'm not entirely sure. I think that was episode 58, and I don't know what happened with this one. I mean, for an arcade port for R-Type, which is in my top 5 list, you compare it to Double Dragon, they just aren't in the same league at all. The graphics are awful, and the way it replicates the actual arcade. It almost looks like a Commodore 64 game, and the playability is just, it's not there. It's just not very satisfying. There's not enough to do. It doesn't feel like it's worth like £20-25 what they were charging at the time, which was like top range for a title, even on the Amiga back then. I was just very, very disappointed with it. Just no fun in it whatsoever. What about you? Is this one you played?
Yeah, similar feelings really. Very much Commodore 8-bit. Graphics. I mean, we played Final Fight together on Amiga Live, and you thought that was horrible.
Yeah.
And Final Fight, ironically, had better graphics and slightly better playability, slightly better controls, and yet they're both horrible. So it wasn't just a wasted opportunity. It was like something that was knocked together in 2 weeks and said, right, there you go, Double Dragon. Yeah, and the other Double Dragon games, Double Dragon 3 in particular, is supposed to be a really good game on the Amiga.
Oh, is it? Because of the first one, I didn't bother checking if there were any others, but I might have a look at that one actually, just to see if it's any good. We might even do a show on it.
It's bound to be better than Final Fight anyway.
Yeah. I have actually been trying to cover Final Fight for a while, but because I have to film footage from emulators and stuff, just can't get it to work. I've been having all sorts of problems. Yeah, because it is on Amiga Live, so I think I can capture that, so we might go back to that at some point in future. I'd be interested to try and find out the actual story about why it's like that in the first place. Because the same thing happened in a way, because the same company effectively, I think, because the Street Fighter 2 was an awful game as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that US Gold, Street Fighter 2.
Oh, sorry, yes, it was
I'm not
US
quite
Gold.
sure.
I'm just thinking of Capcom as the overall, but they'll be the license holders, so.
It all comes down to the passion behind the conversion, and sometimes they use the excuse that piracy, takes away most of your money as soon as you release it. Therefore, don't spend 2 months doing it, just spend 2 weeks doing it. Therefore, what you get is a pretty forgettable game.
They use that excuse, but then some games are absolutely amazing and they're completed in even less time, so it's just no excuse whatsoever.
Yeah, no excuse. I think even modern day converters, there's hackers going on converting ST versions because they're even better than the Amiga. But, one way or the other, we're going to get them.
Look at that, actually. I didn't know they were doing stuff like that. It'd be quite interesting to see.
Yeah, they've converted a few games from the ST. I can't remember, like Wave the Exploding Fist or something along those lines they converted. Yeah, they're doing them all the time. Stuff that we never got, and really, decent job.
Right, that's pretty much the end of the top 5 and the worst game list. A little extra we wanted to do. These are either things that weren't to be included, or, like for me, I'm going to go forward and just say this is the most disappointing game I have played today on the Amiga. And for this, I ended up picking Myth History in the Making, which I covered back in episode 25. Now, I played this to death on the ZX Spectrum, and I had the 128K plus 2 version. It was so atmospheric. The graphics were fantastic, even for the specky. It really did stand out. These huge, gorgeous sprites and this like mythical environment, all based in like Greek and Egyptian mythology and stuff. And it just worked so well. And the gameplay was amazing. And this is an 8-bit game at the end of the day. I believe the C64 version is supposed to be even better, but for me, I just love the Spectrum graphics. And then coming on to do this show, and I'm looking at things to cover, and I noticed this out of the corner of my eye, and I just think, oh, is that the same? And it is. It's the same Myth game, And I'm thinking, oh God, it's a 16-bit version of that. It's going to be absolutely amazing. And as soon as you sit down to play it, they've changed it completely. The levels are all there. The layout's been changed. It's a lot more squashed and more compact. And I don't think there's scroll. I can't actually remember now if it scrolls properly, although I don't think it does. And they've changed the main character from what was like a teenager trying to survive to this big, muscly Conan the Barbarian hero. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't look terrible, but for what it could have been as a 16-bit version of that game, they just went too far. They shouldn't have done any of that. I don't know if it's one you played, Dan.
Well, I tried to play it, but I never got off level 1, I don't think, because I couldn't figure out how to get rid of a certain boss which needed a certain item. I mean, this game reminds me of First Samurai and Second Samurai, where you guy jumping around on stuff, and it's a great action platformer, really, really done well. Back in the day, System 3 was a powerhouse on the 8-bit systems.
Oh, yeah.
I remember Last Ninja 2 was a top game on the C64, and all the 8-bit systems, when you played it on the Amiga, it was just a hollow shell of what it used to be, and we didn't understand why. I've still no idea why to this day. Maybe they got it converted by a different set of programmers, I've no idea. But for me, Myth, I didn't really get very far on the 64 version, but again, it felt more of an 8-bit game, and even with the chunkier graphics and the colour scheme, for me, it kind of lost a bit of character. Maybe I prefer the old black and white Spectrum.
I think, yeah, with the Spectrum, I think a lot of it was just because they couldn't use lots of colours because of the colour clash. And it was all very red and dark, and you had the black backgrounds. And I think with the C64, there was just too much colour, and it lost a fair bit when you were walking around from level to level. People rate this one as like one of the best C64 games, I believe. I was reading at the time, but...
Yeah, you can definitely get into it, and I think this was released on cartridge as well for the 64, so you can at least load it up in a good time. But for me, if you compare it to a Turrican game, which is vast and sprawling and it's very easy to just shoot stuff, or like an Explorer mode, where you're taking your time, and like Lionheart, taking your time going through it, fun levels, but I mean,
people
something
keep recommending Lionheart, and I've still not played it.
Yeah, it's not bad. The first few levels are quite difficult, but after that it opens up. It's one of them that you have to take your time and not rush through it, because if you rush through it, you just die and think, I'm dead.
I've also had lots and lots of requests to actually cover the Turrican games, and I've sort of started doing the digging for the history on the first one, but then I sat down to actually play it, and I thought it was really difficult, so I just gave up. But I will go back to it. So there's a few games like that. If I suck at them too much, I get really embarrassed because I have to do gameplay footage and reviews, and it's not very fair to sit there and this game's terrible because I can't get off like the first part of the first level.
Yeah, I think it's important if you're going to review a game to at least be able to play it. Getting off the first level is definitely the minimum requirement. You definitely have to sit there and, not master it.
Moonstone for me is one like that. People absolutely love that game. I've tried so many times to play it, but I suck at it so much. I just can't get it down for the actual combat and stuff. And I feel terrible because I really want to do it. And I've even done the research for it as well. Everything's ready to go, but I cannot play the game to save my life.
Yeah, same here. Absolutely. I've tried it a few times. I think you have to memorize the enemy patterns, and there's so many enemies that have certain patterns. But, for me, I never had time to play stuff like that as a kid. I love spending ages playing the Settlers and Dune 2 and big sprawling games. But sometimes, unless a game's going to really grip me straight away, sometimes I think, maybe I'm not sure about this. Yeah, there's been a lot of games like that have just been great games, like Bill's Tomato game, but unless you get deep into it and get into it, you might think, it's not that great. Yeah, same with Fury and the Furries.
I did cover both of them. I really like Bill's Tomato game, but it's been one of the most unpopular games I've covered. Next to Rome AD 92, which I think is appalling because I think that's one of the Amiga's best and no one ever plays it.
Yeah, well, it's isometric 3D, isn't it? I hadn't heard of it before. Well, I had heard of it, but I'd never seen it. There was a more famous one called Robin Hood, I think, which, again, takes a game guide.
Yeah, it's almost like a sequel follow, and it came later, and they upgraded the engine and did all sorts of extra tricks with it, but I just loved that to bits. It was the one game I had on my first game I ever had with me, A600 on the hard drive. I was addicted to it. It was brilliant. We're getting a bit lost there, wobbling about other games. We'll be going on forever. But anyway, is there any standout episodes you've listened to? Anything that really comes to mind looking back over the list?
Well, I'm just looking over the list now, and there's been quite a few standout episodes that I've been quite impressed. For me, I know how much work that you put into the Simon Phipps interview. I thought
that was episode 37.
37. That was an hour and 16 minutes. It was a full-on episode with Simon Phipps. I know he doesn't talk to everybody. I know he's a very busy guy. I learned stuff in that interview that I'd never learned before. It was very clear. It came across very well, as good as any other podcast that I've ever heard, any other interview. And I know you're not keen to advertise it because it was a lot of hard work and it took you like 3 weeks to edit it. But I think you did a tremendous job.
When I was, one thing that stands out in my mind about the entire interview, I did loads of research for it and I was all ready for questions. And we sat there talking to him, mic to mic, and all getting ready. And then I started asking him about the Amiga, and all my notes that I'd made were all about the games he'd done on the Amiga. And then he says, I never actually worked on the Amiga. I think he said he worked on the ST. I didn't know what to do, and I was like, I had to switch gears suddenly. We just started talking more and more about the games. But as we got into it, and he was talking about how the games were ported across, it turned out to be a pretty good episode, I think, because it showed how someone involved in like the developer and that side of it actually got involved in games. And there were a lot closer to the other people working on different versions as well than you would give him credit for usually. And he did have a fair bit of a hand on some of the Amiga later stuff as well, I think. So, I was quite pleased how that one turned out. The only interview I've done so far. Not entirely sure how many more of those we got, because it can be really difficult to find people who are going to do them. I'm not sure how other shows and stuff get people in on a regular basis. I'll see what I can do in future.
Well, sometimes, like I say, getting the developer's side of it. Like I know he did the graphics for Wolfchild that we've mentioned already. He did the famous Rick Dangerous, which is actually based on the name Rick Dangerous. He said in an interview was based on Rick Mail, because they used to do this comedy act with Adrian Edmondson called The Dangerous Brothers. Rick Dangerous is actually Rick Mail from The Dangerous Brothers, and I thought that was a fitting tribute because we obviously lost Rick Mail recently. Yeah. I never knew that. And yeah, it's a fantastic game, and I love Switchblade and Switchblade 2 as well. Great games.
Yeah, great.
I didn't know until perhaps that interview that he was an ST coder. Famously, the Oliver twins never coded anything on the ZX Spectrum, the most famous game system they never coded on.
That did surprise me as well when I first found that out. They built their own device because they did all the coding on the Amstrad, and then that shunted all the code over and converted it onto a Spectrum, and then they just stuck it out effectively on the tape, which is quite funny, really, because everyone thought they were these huge, big Spectrum developers, but they didn't know anything about it. They were just praying and hoping for the best, I think, when they converted things over. It worked brilliantly. I mean, some of my favourite Spectrum games were done by them.
Well, here's hoping for the future then, and maybe if any more developers like Jim Sachs that you spoke to and Simon Phipps.
I mean, I did have a developer behind, I forgot to say before, for R-Type come forward, and he was just chuckling, he was just making a few comments. He said he really enjoyed the episode and stuff, and he liked how it had gone. And he made a few comments. I think I got something wrong in the episode. Again, when you're looking at a more general history of it and you try to look at different things, and it's a bit clouded on across different interviews and things, and he was basically saying all I got really wrong was that they developed the entire engine from scratch. They didn't develop it elsewhere and then bring it across to use, and they were really proud that they'd been able to do this because it was just supposed to be an arcade port. And I think I also got his name wrong, just my terrible accent, and I can never pronounce them properly, so I'm not going to attempt it again because I don't want to upset him if he's still listening.
Well, did you say the R-Type was based on Catechis and Dinaris?
Yes, that was it, yeah.
And he said, what, it isn't?
Well, no, they built an entire engine from scratch for it.
Right, okay. It was not a public domain effort. It was definitely a Factor 5 great production. It's just that Factor 5 have done a lot better games than that. Maybe even Catechis, if you get a chance to have a look at that. They're pretty similar. Not as good graphics, unfortunately. Check them out.
Awesome. Will do. Well, I think that pretty much brings us to a close, Dan. Now, just before we draw out, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, or maybe give yourself a plug for a website?
Well, again, my name's Dan, Life School on LemonTubeAmiga, which is a channel dedicated to Amiga games. I'm going through a season right now, season 5, which should be going on through till next year, very much deep into next year. As you're listening to this, if you love Amiga games, do check it out. Do leave me a comment. Obviously, stay tuned to the both of us for a lot more coming up next year.
As always, guys, thanks for listening, and see you next time.